I'll kick it off then. Thanks for everybody for tuning in to another wonderful episode of the State of the Reactor, which is our community call for the people that are not familiar with that. Just wanted to start it off with a little community note. We're probably going to be doing these once a month now as opposed to bi-weekly, just so we can focus on getting like a substantial amount of updates to communicate rather than kind of regurgitating things every 2 weeks. But that being said, we're going to try pretty hard to drip things out pretty frequently in the Discord as we can and as we're able to once we get in a position to keep revealing things. And we're working hard on a decent socials campaign for Tokemak V2 or Tokemak GP. So expect to see some more activity in the coming weeks from social side. I know we've been a bit quiet, but that's going to change soon. So with that, I will turn it over to the liquidity wizard himself.
Sounds good. Thanks, End. So, hey, everyone, thanks for joining. First off, I think just the things we're going to cover on this call, I'm going to start by kind of doing an overview of sort of state of DeFi, our response with V2 or GP. I'll hit a little bit on our financial position, which is a position of strength, I think, as a protocol that we're building on. And then we're going to dig into a little more details. So I know a number of the team here are going to chime in on a lot of kind of the implications of GP. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about those images that we threw into that I think End threw into the chat, probably both on this call and then also over in the general announcements section. So let's just dig into it here. So first off, I want to thank all of you and the entire Tokemak community for all of your support through a very challenging time, I'd say, over the last handful of months in the crypto industry. Throughout, I think this period, the entire Tokemak team's researched and analyzed the market in a very kind of bottoms up way, and has gained a lot of important lessons and learnings about DeFi. I think we've now rediscovered our place within DeFi and what DeFi is in the first place. And now we're all focused on building the next phase. So a general purpose liquidity network. We've often been calling it Tokemak V2 in the past. And the name that we're kind of anchored on now is Tokemak GP for general purpose. And across all of this, we've weathered the storm, and we're in a good position now to build GP based on everything we've learned. So the three things now I'm going to dig into are a little bit on the state of the crypto and DeFi industry, our response, our financial position, then we'll dig into more stuff on GP. So throughout kind of 2022, it was obviously a super turbulent year for all global markets, not just crypto, but broadly. But crypto, of course, was one of the hardest hit markets. The cascade of events from a number of bad news stories, Terra Luna, 3AC, kind of sent contagion into all the corners of the ecosystem. And then to sort of cap everything off, 2022 culminated with the revelations at FTX, and all of these disasters sort of impacted every facet of crypto. And DeFi, well, in a lot of ways, weathered the storm functionally. Maybe as the best area, it was hit one of the hardest of any of the areas, just due to the fact that it was and is sort of a bleeding edge of innovation within an already bleeding edge ecosystem. So across DeFi, obviously you could see a lot of instability, token prices plummeting, decreased trading activity, liquidity drying up, and a lot of DeFi protocols sort of seemed to disappear overnight. So even though this is sort of the backdrop in kind of 2022, all of us on the Tokemak team believe the future is very bright, not just for Tokemak, but also for DeFi. And we're optimistic about crypto and DeFi for a number of reasons. So centralization was definitely behind the biggest failures of the market in the last year. And so the case for decentralization has really never been stronger. Ethereum and other blockchains really are powering a very robust economy at this point, with billions of dollars a year in revenue. Smart contracts, self-custody really are kind of the backbone of democratization and decentralization of finance. And I think we're going to see more and more adoption of that in interesting new ways. And I also think that one thing people aren't thinking about or or most people aren't thinking about at the moment, is that I believe DeFi protocols and the smart contracts that power them are going to soon take on additional source of value as a lot of companies, banks, institutions start to think about using them as back-end infrastructure. So if you've had a lot of dollars parked in a smart contract for a period of time, that starts just inherently becoming a very valuable piece of infrastructure out in the ecosystem, and lots of groups will look to probably use those in different ways. And of course, throughout all of this, infrastructure, especially DeFi infrastructure, has remained pretty damn resilient throughout all this. And we've had a very good shakeout of bad actors, I think, over the last 6+ months. And so now we can kind of shift everything back to the focus of fundamentals, technology, and true builders. So with this kind of as the backdrop, over the last year, Tokemak, being a liquidity provider with assets deployed on chain, was in a very kind of unique position to watch all of this play out, observing the impact that events had on trading markets, liquidity as everything unfolded. We've learned a lot of things by analyzing this, and I think for a while, just like everyone in the space, we were trying to learn what all of this meant. And from all of those learnings, which I'll list out a few here, we've now realized something really powerful that can be built that can kind of power a lot of things throughout DeFi. Still building on what was core to Tokemak V1, but in a very expanded scope and with some very targeted pools that will be very powerful, which we're going to get to over the coming days and weeks here. So a few of the things we learned was DAO governance token markets generally exhibit extreme volatility. No surprise there. But with insufficient trading volume that comes with a bear market that we've seen, it means that lower trading volumes and lower fees don't compensate for the high kind of market and other types of risks of these pools. So those deployments generally are super unprofitable for LPs, and that's Tokemak included if it's a Tokemak deployed LP. A lot of the incentive systems out there generally don't overcome fundamentally unprofitable pools and liquidity positions unless you can set up an additional support of some sort or a scheme provided directly by the DAOs themselves that issue the tokens to support those markets. General unsustainable incentivization for liquidity, so pool 2 type approaches, generally lead into sort of an escalation of incentives and can promote, doesn't have to, but can promote sort of predatory type users who are sort of the farm and dump type from a large portion of the LPs, rather than kind of aligning all parties in more of a symbiotic relationship. And kind of as an extension of that, perceived value of what the rewards that you're earning are plays a very significant role in the success of incentive campaigns. A lot of the things that really help you in a bull market hurt you in a bear market. So in a bull market, when everything's up, people assign a higher value on what they're earning for rewards because they think tomorrow things are worth more than they are today. In a bear market, it's sort of the opposite. So rewards, inflation, a lot of those things all of a sudden become more of a hindrance when the markets switch over. So those things, even in a bull market, led to inefficiencies and in general overinflation. Tokemak was guilty of this, as well as most areas of DeFi throughout sort of the 2020, 2021, 2022 period. And in general, there's a lot of interesting mechanics out there, but larger players definitely have a significant advantage over smaller players with things like bribing, gauge controls, markets such as convex aura, things like that. And smaller players generally don't have as many of these benefits for a number of reasons, potentially just that they don't have a stockpile or access to a stockpile of the relevant tokens in order to enable that functionality. So what we're sort of building next in order to, or our response to all of this, after looking at all of these lessons in the space, is to build V2. We'll start, I might say V2 and GP, who I'm still very used for a long time. The team's been saying V2. So we're building V2, which we're calling GP, which is going to expand Tokemak into a general purpose liquidity network. So harnessing the lessons we were just talking about, we're going to be building on the fundamental idea that was around since the inception of Tokemak, which is a liquidity network to power DeFi. So the goal with Tokemak GP is to expand Tokemak to a much, much broader audience and allow the protocol to evolve to support any general purpose liquidity need. So no longer will Tokemak be limited to two-sided trading market liquidity, but rather any liquidity need across DeFi could be addressed And effectively, what you now have is a network that can match demand for liquidity with supply for liquidity. And we're going to get to this. This sort of plugs into some of the kind of cartoon high-level architecture pictures that were posted in the chats earlier. We'll get to that shortly. But just to hit some of the kind of summary of some of the more powerful features of V2 or of GP, the available LP opportunities within the system is going to expand really to any asset in any desired market, which are generally profitable markets. It does not have to be two-sided trading liquidity markets. And this is going to dramatically increase Tokemak's user base instead of a much more limited DAO governance token kind of focused role that Tokemak V1 played. By the way, that's not going away. It will be a subset of the Tokemak GP solution, but we're going to have this much broader use case. Risk and return are going to become much more appropriately aligned. So Tokemak is not going to bear any of the residual and permanent loss risk in any way associated with any token pair liquidity. And so this means that rather than Tokemak being, having some features that look a little bit like a decentralized market maker, Tokemak is strictly a liquidity network that enables users to configure and do things they couldn't otherwise do by themselves. So as users or protocols or businesses configure liquidity deployments through Tokemak, Tokemak becomes a liquidity network and earns platform fees on all activity. So revenue or rewards become much more, at the protocol level, become much more repeatable and not nearly as exposed to whether you have protocols that are using your platform or if the underlying reward tokens you're earning go up and down in price. We'll continue to service DAOs throughout all of this, and we're going to be able to create a much more transparent, competitive market for DAO liquidity, where there's really rate discovery for how much it takes to rent liquidity for any use case. The updated architecture that we're building for Tokemak GP is going to be much more efficiently and easily deployed to L2s. So that's going to come very early on in the life cycle of this, and that's an important piece of how we're architecting this. There were some reasons with Tokemak V1 that it made it much more difficult than it should have been to go to L2s. And some of the building blocks of this, we're going to get to this later. Custom liquidity management pools are going to empower both users and protocols to construct their own aggregator of sub-strategies that can be deployed in Tokemak GP. And then users will be able to spin up new pools, flexibly control them themselves. So to kind of summarize this before I go on to a little bit on the financial position, and then we'll dig more into GP. GP is going to be incredibly important for Web3 going forward. And it's really going to support broad-based sort of liquidity as the space grows. We want to make sure that we can serve individual users as well as DAOs, protocols, crypto companies as the need for more sustainable liquidity bandwidth matures. Last kind of thing on this overview that I'll hit here is we have a very strong kind of position that we're building GP from. So we've been operating Tokemak V1 in a relatively safe mode with increased risk parameters due to all the kind of tumultuous markets over the last handful of months. But even still, the monthly reward generation or revenue generation that the protocol is able to bring in has been 80K minimum, and revenue generation was as high as 400K over the last year. Again, that's just because the protocol tokens that the protocol was earning, those decreased so much, so that's sort of where these go up and down, as well as trading activity decreased. But it means that revenue generation is still underway. And over kind of a very, let's say, tumultuous and volatile period in the market, our smart contracts have safely held more than $2 billion at peak in notional value. And we've been running for about 1.5 years. And so we're proud of that. And just kind of note on the treasury. So the treasury is currently valued at around $29 million USD equivalent. About 17 million is held in stable coins. So even if you just look at stable coins, we have a huge runway. We can build whatever we want going forward and make sure that we really realize the vision of a liquidity network to power DeFi. Okay, so given that, let's jump over. I'll say one more thing, then I think I'm going to throw it over to Craig, and we're going to come back to sort of the images that were dropped in the announcements channel in a little bit. But one quick note, just in general on Tokemak GP, is that This really matches liquidity demand and liquidity supply in a way that wasn't possible before, is what's going to happen here. So if you look before Tokemak, the way liquidity and market making was generally handled in crypto, you had centralized market makers interfacing with protocols themselves, and the protocols were always overpaying almost without exception. Were always overpaying. The market makers were setting the rate, and the projects paid the market makers too much. So you didn't have an efficient price discovery. Tokemak launched, and in the bull market where inflation was everything, Tokemak was paying the LPs too much for a while. So neither of these did we really get to a proper sort of free market that was determining the rental rate of liquidity. And one of the big goals and one of the big pieces we're going to unearth with Tokemak GP is the ability to introduce a transparent free marketplace where these rates of liquidity rental are efficiently determined. With that, I think I can throw it over to Craig, and in a little bit we'll get back to some of those like diagrams that were thrown over.
Thank you, sir. Great. So I think what I'll do here is dig into a little bit on the status of Tokemak V1 and a couple of the high-level learnings, and that will set up a little bit more from Bruno and Sharp, who will dig into some of the compelling features we have in store for V2. Some of this may be a repeat of a couple points I hit on the last State of the Reactor, so forgive me, but we'll get into some new stuff too. I think as we take a look at Tokemak V1, it did a lot of things really well. We enabled single asset staking, and through incentive designs within our system, we were able to pair assets together and then deploy them into LP positions based on kind of the liquidity directors and overall mechanisms for pairing assets in the system. And this was innovative at the time. It's still innovative. This is a new paradigm, and it's something that we're able to build upon, which is awesome. In this very, very wild, tumultuous 2022 and into 2023, we've enabled liquidity to stay in the market, continue to support those projects, continue to support those reactors, and while doing that, maintain the risk protections, the IL protections we've had for our LPs. And I think, as a lot of us know, not everyone was successful in doing that in these conditions. So these are a lot of wins we can build upon from Tokemak V1. In this initial version of the product, we've also learned an incredible amount, and we've seen where the friction points are in continuing to scale the system from its original design architecture. And Carson hit a couple of them already. I'll hit a couple again. Probably one of the most fundamentally restricting points in scaling Tokemak as it exists today is that we're pretty constrained on the types of assets and the markets that we support. And for purely motivated, financially motivated actors, we're just not really supporting the right markets. There are other more desirable risk performance LP positions that people can benefit from. And I think we can, by stripping away some of the constraints, enable Tokemak to be a much more dynamic and flexible system that supports any kind of markets, in particular the ones that are reflective of where people are desiring to participate in any given market condition. So that's really exciting. And at the same time, we've learned a lot about supporting DAOs. Now, even if those aren't fundamentally the most sort of like profitable or desirable markets for purely motivated LPs, there will be a way for us to find this sort of rental rate that Carson mentioned to support DAOs. And so DAO support and liquidity as a service is a key, continues to be a key pillar in Tokemak GP. Kind of along that, what we've done and what will inform a lot of the things that you'll learn about the levers in Tokemak GP are come out of working directly with a lot of the high profile teams in this space. So this kind of GP exploration enabled us to sit down with these protocols that we've been working with, and outside of the ones that have current reactors in particular, and talk with them about how they think about liquidity and what their goals are, what are they trying to achieve with liquidity in this space, kind of what those key pain points are, independent of Tokemak. And those conversations have highlighted a number of really valuable insights into some of the pain points that they face and some of the challenges that they have in maintaining and creating and even developing a strategy for liquidity. I think we'll go into those specifics in more detail in the future. But I think sort of the key takeaway here is these solutions that we're designing in Tokemak GP are informed directly by these leading teams in the space, and they're really excited about what we're going to be offering to them, and they're excited to build it, and we're going to continue to build this with them in mind and sort of with their with the confidence that we're creating a platform and a protocol that these teams are going to find useful and supporting liquidity for whatever their goals are in the space, and that it continues to adapt and evolve with those teams over time. And then the last piece, I think, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, Craig, and then I'll jump in. I think before we have Sharp and Bruno hit the last big piece.
Cool. Yeah, and the last piece that I think you already mentioned it was that our alignment between risk or cost of liquidity and the benefits of those who had that liquidity or received revenue from that liquidity wasn't as aligned as I think we could have made it in Tokemak V1. And finding better alignment will be a key piece of Tokemak GP.
Okay, great. So I'm going to actually jump into just cover those 3 different slides or pages that End had thrown into the chat before. I think you can find it in the announcements channel, and correct me if I'm wrong, and then also in this State of the Reactor channel. So just real quick to kind of cover the core 3 concepts here, and then I'll turn it over to Bruno and Sharp. So we mentioned that we're expanding to become a general purpose liquidity network, and the first page sort of shows like some pieces, not all, but some of the kind of compare contrast for before and after. So in V1, DAOs were really the main users of Tokemak, and I think we've mentioned in the past that meant when we went to transition to a bear market, not only was Tokemak affected as a protocol, as a DeFi protocol, but also most of its users were kind of DeFi protocols, so you're kind of double hit. Going forward, we want to make sure that all token holders can become users and that it's very easy and intuitive to be able to interact with Tokemak GP, as opposed to Tokemak V1. By the way, there'll still be fun, deep dive things you can do to go deep into Tokemak. We won't lose that, but we want it to be very easy, very, very easy for people holding tokens to come and utilize the liquidity management pools that they can configure with Tokemak GP. We were specific to a handful of the kind of early liquidity models, not just 50-50 like it's chosen that, but kind of the V2 type pools across Uniswap, SushiSwap, Curve, Balancer, even though Balancer has some configuration there. And going forward, we're going to be generalized to any liquidity need that can be configured. In the past, we were on-chain, but there were some specific triggers that hit things for certain events. We'll be fully on-chain with GP. And that was going to enable us kind of for this last point I mentioned before to easily scale to L2s and other chains. So the basic building blocks kind of Tokemak GP are liquidity management pools. And the idea here is how can you generalize what we used for a very targeted purpose with Tokemak V1 so that you can then do many more things with these besides just kind of have LDs route liquidity down to venues. And so if you look at that page, really the idea here is you have a deposit pool that takes deposits from LPs, not surprisingly. There is a pool coordinator logic, which can do a lot of things. It's on-chain. It can be quite simple or very complex. And it could do things like provide liquidity, like what was done in the past, but it can also do things like maximize profit across some certain set of constraints. It can diversify across venues, rebalance, different things like that. And within that logic, it then has settings for what available tokens can be moved between, as well as what deployed venues. And it's going to be much broader than just the simple 3 that I throw on the page, but that just gives you an idea of like, okay, there's also logic to determine where those things go. For DAOs, protocols, institutions using this, there's also the ability to put an external supply or external rewards, which is really where some tokens, say ABC, can be put in so that you can attract ETH or stablecoin holders to be paired with that token, and also put external rewards. And really this gets into the ability to increase transparency, liquidity, and risk management for protocols that use these liquidity management pools for a certain purpose, which that particular usage might look kind of similar to Tokemak V1, but there's all kinds of other things you can use this generalized approach for. And the important thing is, while we're going to be launching with a few pools that are going to do things very different than what was happening in Tokemak V1, one of which was going to be somewhat similar but more powerful, the other of which will be brand new, we are going to introduce a custom liquidity management pool configuration process where individuals, DAOs, the community, people can come and basically tell us what pools should be out there. So there'll be a configuration approach where you can spin up a liquidity management pool. Think a little bit like Curve factory pools, where you can now select what you're spinning up, what type of pool it is, which assets it accepts, what venues it can go to. Are there access restrictions? So kind of the broadest free market approach here should be you can have it fully public, or it could be whitelisted to only a certain amount of wallets if an individual wants to run a strategy and be the only one that could interact in that one, or KYC'd only. Like there's going to be a lot of abilities to sort of gatekeep if groups want to. Most of the pools and all of the mainline pools will be public, so don't worry about that. And then also ability to put things like external supply and rewards. Once these things are configured, it would then go to Token governance. This gives, in addition to the new reward generation capabilities of this system, which are going to be significant. I don't think we get to that too much on this call, but there'll be new forms of Token governance here to turn on new liquidity management pools. And then ultimately, following a successful vote, those pools will be deployed. So we'll be launching with ones that we know will be really compelling in this model, but this is how then the system expands itself, is with you, the community, and DeFi users broadly configuring and deploying liquidity management pools as they need for a lot of different use cases. So with that, I think I can turn it over to Bruno and Sharp, and they can talk a little more on implications of Tokemak GP.
I'll give you. Oh, go ahead, Bruno.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to jump in just like real quick, and then Manuel, I'll give it over to you, and I'll try with some details also. So I just wanted to like kind of give the outline of like how we're going to speak about this, because there's some like kind of mechanics, like specific mechanics we're not going to get into at the moment, just because we're like kind of mindful of like, you know, not sharing too much at this point in time. But I think that kind of the main key point here is the like the product market fit and the value add, like the value prop that we have for this product, which will be amazing, which also says like kind of a lot about the kind of the underlying mechanics without going too much into this. So I think Manuel can start by like giving a little bit of his vision of it, and then we can pop in with a lot of details on certain points. Manuel.
Yeah, so for me, for V2, the end game is really for Tokemak's rates to become the market rates. And this is going to be applied to the various liquidity markets that we are going to serve, that, as Carson said, are going to expand beyond the volatile markets. So we currently have a problem on the DAO side while accessing liquidity, which is there is no predictable manner to do so. And at the same time, there is no on-demand form to access this liquidity. So on V1, we saw that we had a lot of constraints in terms of POA. And in order to source this inventory on V2, we're just going to offer a solution for LPs where you're going to have a very efficient form of deploying your assets. And those assets are then going to be available for the DAOs to use for their own personal deployments. In my current idea for V2, the singularity point becomes when the demand for this liquidity marketplace fully meets the needs for the LPs that are looking for efficient form to deploy their assets. And when the two overlap, Tokemak's rate becomes really the market rate. This is very exciting because having this oracle that Tokemak becomes for the rates for the different types of liquidity means that this becomes the plug-and-play solution where protocols can come, no upfront costs for the liquidity that they're going to access, and just add a huge value add to the current system where you rely on mechanisms that are unpredictable in terms of incentives and the liquidity that you'll get. In addition to this, there will also be changes in terms of tokenomics. And previously on Tokemak V1, you add to have exposure, direct exposure to the token, and that also undermines the addressable market that you can expand to. So on V2, everyone will be able to access the product without necessarily having exposure to the token. However, all of this will improve the utility for the token, and it will be a flywheel effect where as we start to have more customers on the DAO side, the token will benefit from it. I will also be covering this on a long-form article in the future, and I will fully explain the whole vision, the markets that we want to serve, and the end goal that we have with the current version. But I can speak for the rest of the team. We're all really, really excited for this, and very excited also to share with the community our full plan.
Yeah, and I'll just hop in and like iterate a couple of points and like go into like maybe a little bit more detail on some of them. So I think like in my view, like the way I would describe it is like the vision like for Tokemak GP is to create like a really like symbiotic relationship between like people choosing to like provide liquidity. But on Tokemak GP, I would not purely see that there will be like a bigger addressable market in terms of LPs, right? And then the DAOs that seek that liquidity by creating like this predictable and transparent like marketplace. And also like further down the line, developing GP, we have already put our like sights on like additional features like way in the future. So there's like building on this marketplace, there's a lot of like added functionality which will like further increase the utility of Tokemak's like service to like all these participants. So like to just go over like the value props that I see for specifically like now for like DAOs or like those seeking the liquidity is as Sharp like mentioned, the predictability of the liquidity, which is achieved by the transparency regarding the rates to attract it, and like an on-demand style of interacting with it. They'll have like a flexibility to set up campaigns. Like what I mean by that is like basically set incentives, like utilize these rates to attract liquidity. And they will have the flexibility to do so via like the variety of like current like levers they can pull, right? Like think convex, curve, directly incentivizing pools, which will not affect like kind of our ability to interact with those rates. But at the same time, there will be ways for them to interact with Tokemak directly, for which we plan on building like a very like easy to use, convenient like user experience that is DAO facing, which will include like a dashboard like displaying the information that they require to like make informed decisions and then like to directly interact with the protocol. Here I can say a little bit about like the dev stuff is that the front end and like the UX team, like the design team has already worked or is working currently like on iterations for like kind of throwing together ideas like how to display the information. And I've seen them and they're like mind-blowing so far. But there's going to be like a lot of work that goes into this. And I think like as we go, people could be on the lookout. We've done more in the past now, like in the past few weeks. There might be more community involvement in terms of like testing things or like having a look at certain aspects of it. Then for the LPs, the value props here, I think is like an expansion of like to additional markets, right? Like not only think of volatile pairs, then it's going to be very cost efficient for them to provide liquidity. And the way I would think of it is like as an LP here, you would not like kind of statically provide liquidity. You would basically participate in LP strategies as a way to think of it, which will include benefits like auto compounding, etc. They'll also have like a central and simple to use interface that provides them with like all the necessary information and the ability to like manage their LP portfolio like everything like in one spot. We will have overall, there will be, since it's a different setup as V1 in terms of like how the POA plays into the whole system, there will be less restriction in terms of like guardrails, right? Like on liquidity deployments, which will mean that a big difference to V1 would also be that the TVL will be more directly and less efficiently utilized, right? So like in the past, we had kind of the guardrails that like if you had like $500 million worth of SNX, you weren't able to deploy it because the POA was determining with the guardrail like how much of that could flow out. And we'll see like way less restriction there. So the TVL will be like way more efficiently used, which will also like be reflected then, of course, like in the protocol revenue, like in the fees and etc. that the protocol can generate. Yeah, and then I think, sorry, Manuel, go ahead.
I was just going to say that in the past, I've seen a lot of questions from users where they directly associate a decrease in TVL with a decrease in terms of the efficiency for the protocol itself. And it couldn't be further from the contrary, because due to all the guardrails that we have and the POA restrictions, we actually needed to shrink the TVL in order to decrease the incentives that the protocol was providing. What happens then with V2 is that you scale directly with the TVL that exists within the protocol. So suddenly you can and you will be able to assume that the correlation of more TVL is indeed good for the protocol, which wasn't true before. And this point usually doesn't fully come across, and it can seem counterintuitive in terms of optics, but that was the case, and it's still the case with V1. And another note on the UI, I know that from speaking with a lot of community members, it's not self-explanatory how Tokemak deploys assets just by looking at the UI. And now with explorations that I've already seen for V2, it will become very intuitive for you to know what's going to happen with your deployments and what the overall strategy is achieving.
Yep. And I think I can close on like a couple of words, because I think the main question will be like kind of timeline of things. I think what I can say, I think fairly safely in that regard is like the dev team has like started on the groundwork, like on the very base layer of it already. Also, like there I mentioned that the goal is to like get as much of this, if possible, everything on chain. That being said, we're still speccing out some of the details of some parts, which could alter this timeline. So we think we should have we should finalize these specs like in the coming weeks, and then we will have a very clear view on kind of the expected timeline and lift to build this, which will be then informed by the devs. But yeah, as mentioned, dev team's already working on like some of the kind of the base layer of it. The design team and the UX team is like already working on beautiful ways to like turn all the data into like a smooth and clear user experience, which will also like have, I think, a lot of changes until we like finally launch, which often I hope we can include the community there a little bit. Yeah. Craig?
I was just going to add that the release of V2, it will be a staged launch, and we will target initially the markets that are more interesting, both for the LPs and for the protocol. And given that this is all already defined, we're very confident that people can get excited about V2.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. I'll wrap it up. I know Carson had to jump for another call a bit earlier, but just another final note, I guess, on what Bruno was saying timeline-wise is we're hoping that we'll be able to give some more concrete details by the next State of the Reactor. So we're looking forward to that. And we're extremely excited about what's to come. And thanks, everyone, for joining State of the Reactor. I know that was a lot of information to digest, so we've recorded it, and I'll pass that over to Tradium, and we'll share the link so you guys can go back and listen again. very shortly here. So if there's nothing else that anybody else wants to say, then we can conclude here. And thanks everyone once again.
Cool.
Thank you all.
Thank
We will
you.
talk to you all soon. If people are going to be in East Denver, shoot us a message. We'll have some representation there, and always happy to connect.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Thanks everyone. Appreciate it. More soon.